First thing I want to cover certainly should be the first on anyone's list, and that is the sound itself. Just what sound should we be expecting from any particular instrument, whether it be trumpet, whether it be trombone, tuba, or the euphonium. Now, the sound to be produced utilizes 4 elements. These elements being embouchure, breath, equipment, and concept. Without any of these 4 elements, we are in trouble. Without being able to teach these 4 elements and understand them as a performer, we are lacking in the basic tone production that is so necessary. That we must have the right embouchure. We must have the right breath and correct breath support. We must have the right equipment and truly a concept. Let me get into the embouchure first. I believe maybe a little differently, and I will approach you now from the beginning stages because this is where the embouchure is established. But right now, are you not looking at me with a fine embouchure? Is not your chin pointed? Is not the corners of your lip quite set? You're not smiling, you're not puckering. It's when we work with the youngster and we mention, don't do this, don't do that, that we begin to have trouble. If we tell a youngster, don't smile now, don't smile, then they bring the corners in too far. And we end up with this type of sound, the sound you're so used to hearing. Now, you don't have students that sound like that, do you? This is the opposite of smiling, of directing everything right to the middle, of getting the buzz coming right here in the middle of the embouchure. Way too tight here in the center. And this can be started simply by saying, now don't smile. So they bring it in too tight. Plus the fact, of course, the youngsters are really desirous of getting this first sound, and they are tight. Their muscles are too weak, so they pinch it together. But now if we tell a student not to pucker, so they bring the corners back, and then we have this sound. The real hard sound, the hard, bright, harsh sound, which certainly is not the approach and the sound that we expect from a euphonium. We want just the basic fundamentals which are there. I will tell a youngster usually one thing, and that is your lips are together, right? Now blow the air down just at a 45-degree angle. All of you try that. Just blowing the air down at a 45-degree angle. Now you notice you don't smile, you don't pucker, the chin goes a little flat, and for the center range of your instrument, in this middle range, the air does travel downward to some degree. It will not go straight into the horn. If you do blow it straight into the horn, you usually have to smile, and you will then get this bright sound again. I'm directing the air straight to the middle part of the mouthpiece. I wish for my air to have a slight downward angle at this beginning stage. Going downward in the mouthpiece for the middle range. But if we can keep it as simple in our instructions to the youngsters, simple in our approach as performers, the more natural we can perform, the better our sounds are going to be. The more relaxed we will be. I think it's so important that we do keep things quite natural and quite relaxed. Firm, yes, and the firmness coming through practice, through going through the right exercises, of getting the muscles strong so that it can be firm yet still relaxed. But basically this is the embouchure that I teach. Having the fundamentals correct simply by not emphasizing what the students will be doing wrong. With your beginning classes, you will have those who will have problems, who all of a sudden the chin will bunch up, or who will smile, or who will pucker. It's these individuals that we have to work with, single out their problems. They will be in the minority. Keep things simple in our instructions, and then if you see a problem, we go over and we work with this one individual or this other individual. But if you just simply blanket out to a group of not to do this, that you do something else, then we get in problems with the youngster of wanting to overdo it. And then we have too tight of embouchures or too hard of embouchures. Breath. Item number 2. Now we have two problems with breath. Of getting the air in, then getting the air back out. Let's go through something which I think is valuable in working with youngsters. And I say youngsters, I use this same technique with my own students. I have yet to have a student walk into my studio that breathes really correctly, that is fulfilling the requirements of breath, of using breath to the extent that it should be. I have to go through this routine with him of filling up correctly. And doing something will be worth 1,000 words. We can get up in front of our class and explain how we want the air to go downward, how we want the lungs to fill from the bottom up and expand here and expand there and so forth. But if we can just come across one little action which will teach it to them without saying anything, then we have accomplished much more of getting them to feel a right way to do it. Instead of trying to explain it to them, get them in some position or action which will cause them to feel the right way to do it. Now, here's what I have my students do. I'd like for all of you to slide up on the edge of your chairs. Good. Now, lean over in your chairs. Lean over as far as you can, putting your hands underneath the outside of your legs. Just pull yourself down. All right, all of you take a breath. All right, you see where that air is going? Try to breathe in correctly. Try to make that air go to the top part of your chest. It's impossible, isn't it? Okay, so now stay down there for a minute. Stay down. You're not through yet, people. All right, take a breath. All right, come up 2 inches. Take another breath. Come up 2 more inches. Take another breath. And keep it going into the same direction. Keep coming up, breathing. All right, now you're sitting upright. Right now, you have taught the students where that air goes. In that length of time, you have taught them where the air will end up and be sucked in to the bottom part of the lungs from this position. And you will have to keep your eye open as the class does this for that 1 or 2 individuals that will lose it as they come up. Now, this is really only half of it. Did you not just expand the bottom part of the lungs here? Just this lower part? Are not our lungs also up at the upper part of the chest? So we have to go a step further. Now, you've been breathing correctly, but only halfway. Let's breathe the rest of the way and fill the lung capacity right up here to the top part of the chest, that everything will expand. And then the person has a full capacity of air. But of course, the usual things are necessary, that the shoulders don't move, that it's all related to the actual lung area. But in getting it across to the younger students or of any individual as a performer who feels that they aren't pulling this air in correctly, put yourself over and in this position of leaning forward with your head between your legs and breathing in. That's item number 1, getting this air in. How do we get it back out again? I utilize 2 ways to get this air, to get across to the student how to project the air, the intensity that it must have. Now, as far as terminology goes, I use the terminology that the air must go fast. You must have the feeling that that air is traveling. All right, now if something is traveling fast, what else does it do? A bullet is traveling fast. What else does that bullet do? Spins. If you shoot a bow and arrow, say, that arrow is going fast. What else is that arrow doing? Spinning. If you think of motion, of speed, you invariably will relate it also to spinning. So if we can think of those 2 things, that the air moves fast, that the air spins through that horn, of getting this air doing something, traveling somewhere, having a definite purpose. And a purpose means motion. Now, to get this across to a youngster, what can we do? I utilize 2 ways. Number 1 is having the students holler hey. And I mean really hollering hey. I want all of you to try that, okay? Yeah, right away, one of the first things you do is sit up, isn't it? When we get you to do something. Sit up all the time. All right, here we go. Hollering, hey. Right with me now. Ready? Now. Hey! Did you feel what happened down here? Did you feel what happened? Do it again and notice how the throat feels. Ready? Now. Hey! It's open, isn't it? You don't go, hey! No. Hey! It's open. All right, but that's a quick jerk. That doesn't fulfill what we want. Now, the next thing I have the students do is hiss. Try that. Take a breath and hiss at me. Do you feel it? Do you feel what's happening? Okay. But what else is happening that's wrong with hissing? Many teachers use just this, the hissing. But there is something wrong with just hissing. Your throat is all closed up, is it not? So this is why I go back and say to the students, this is why we hollered, hey. If you can have the same feeling when you are blowing on your instrument of projecting that sound, the same feeling as when you were hissing with the feeling of the hey, the opening of the throat, this in essence is really how we should feel when we are performing that instrument. Of getting the intensity and drive of the hiss, the openness of hollering hey. This is getting that air out. But we do have another problem. If you can imagine one steady, long line of sound. Now, if we took a breath and just held it without any intensity, the first part of our sound would be all right. But then halfway through that sound, what would begin to happen to the tonal quality and the pitch of that sound? It would begin to drop without any intensity. And at the tail end of our phrase is where we need to really project that air. Not at the beginning. But most of us project at the beginning. I want all of you now to take a breath and just hold it. What is that air trying to do? Let it out. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to get out of there. When we take a breath and play on our instruments, if we start pushing this air, which wants to get out of there anyway, and then we drive the air, what happens to the tail end of our phrases? We have nothing left. We haven't gauged our air. At the beginning of our phrases, people, we don't have to push that strong. We don't have to have this strong, intensified feeling, because this air is wanting to get out of there anyway. It has to be supported, yes, but nothing like as the tone and this line of sound progresses. As if you can imagine once again this line dropping off in a curve downwards, symbolizing the flatness and the intensity, losing ground because of losing intensity at the end of the phrase. What we have to do is go through, and as the phrase gets longer, is push harder and push harder at the tail end of that phrase. This is where we really need to support. This is where we need to drive that sound, so that in reality, even though we want a note to stay steady, straight, and firm, our breath line, even though we will not crescendo, should actually look much like a crescendo. We keep the air well supported so that it is constantly intensified the longer the phrase. Now, too many of us work in reverse. We push at the beginning and then we have nothing left over at the end. So phrase endings suffer. And you band directors, in working with a phrase in your band, where do you have your problems? Do you have problems with the beginning of a phrase or the end of a phrase? At the end of a phrase. Because of the lack of being able to control this air, intensified for the entire length of that whole phrase. So not only do we have to worry about getting the air in, getting the air back out, but gauging that air so that all of the air doesn't go out at the beginning, but that we do have one straight, pure, smooth phrase, gauging the air. The third thing, equipment. And in equipment, that we are intelligent. With the beginner, that we don't start on too large of a mouthpiece. Or as a performer, that we don't perform on too small of a mouthpiece. That the equipment that we have is the right equipment for us. At the beginning level, a medium mouthpiece. Not overly deep, not overly large. If it's too large, their muscles cannot control this large mouthpiece, and they're fighting the mouthpiece. If it's too small and too shallow, then it offers too much resistance. The same with starting at a beginner on the smaller bore type instrument. There's so much resistance that it is too difficult. It doesn't give enough freedom for the beginner. But as we develop, as we grow on our instruments, we should think in terms of developing toward larger mouthpieces, deeper mouthpieces, larger bored instruments, for the sound which today is being more accepted as the brass sound, which is a larger sound, a deeper type sound, a fuller sound, not the brightness in sound. The larger the mouthpiece, the deeper the cup, the larger the sound, the darker the sound. Now, people, this can be carried to an extreme, can it not? That a person goes into just too large of a mouthpiece. I have tried to use a larger mouthpiece. My sound does suffer. It gets too open. My accuracy suffers. So that at the present time, this mouthpiece is the mouthpiece which works. Others use larger mouthpieces. Those that are playing all the time and really able to control it are able to use a larger mouthpiece. But they wish to have this larger sound, and they want this larger concept of sound. So as we develop on our instruments, we certainly must think in terms of going toward larger mouthpieces to give us the full and the depth of sound that we need. Intelligence will tell us between the performer or the student and the teacher of when a person is ready to move on to a larger mouthpiece. As we develop with our sound, as we develop with our control, we also must think in terms of going to a larger mouthpiece and larger bored instruments to give us the concept of sound that is needed for today's bands and is needed for today's brass concept of sound. Now, the fourth thing, which I just mentioned, concept. Now, people, here is an important element. I will not say that it is more important than embouchure, or that it is more important than breath, or more important than equipment. But it is equally as important. I hate to put any one of these elements over each other and say this is the most important one, because if any one is lacking, then our sound is also lacking. But concept, you must have right up in your ears what this instrument is supposed to sound like. One of the main reasons that you are here today, that you came to this clinic, was it really to hear me talk? Have you not heard persons talk time and time and time again? You band directors will bear me out here. But more than anything, you came here to see what I sounded like. You wanted to hear this particular instrument performed. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's immaterial. But you wanted to hear the horn. Get a concept of its sound. And this is the way it should be. And with youngsters, they should be made well aware of what their particular instruments sound like. Now, people, where can you get this concept? Of course, records. Think of the television set. I mention that simply because it is the most adaptable device that we have, and the most expedient device that we have available to us. Have you noticed lately in the commercials the beautiful oboe work, the French horn, the theme music? I guarantee you'll never hear the euphonium coming underneath some music off your television set. And this is why I appreciate your attendance here today. I hope that you will get some idea of what a euphonium should sound like, what the correct sound is. Just how bright is it, how dark is it, the timbre of it, just in general the concept. If I was to try to take this horn and paint a mental picture or think of something tangible that I could look at, that I could touch relative to the sound of this horn, I would think of a big piece of blue velvet. I would look at it. That's the color of my sound. I could walk over and I could feel it, and it would be very, very smooth to the touch, very pleasing. This is the sound of the euphonium. But you must have a concept. And as often as you are able to listen to various performers on your particular instrument, your concept will develop. and until the point where you will have in your ear a sound that you can strive for. And again, your sound is going to be different than mine because your concept will be slightly different than mine. Plus physical differences in our own structure, they're going to be different. None of us will have the exact same concept. But we must develop a concept nonetheless. So we listen and we listen. The only way that we can get a concept is by using our ears and developing this concept. So to get our sound, the sound which is acceptable, the correct sound, we have embouchure, breath, equipment, and concept. These 4 elements. And in our teaching, we cover these 4 elements. In our practicing, we cover these 4 elements. And we ask ourselves and evaluate our own playing as where we stand relative to these 4 elements. The next thing I would like to get into is the use of the tongue. Tongue placement. Now, first of all, I want all of you to say ta. Just say ta for me. Go ahead. What happened to your jaw? It dropped, did it not? And yet this is one of the things that we try to cover in our brass playing, is to perform and not have the jaw bouncing, that we do have a steady jaw. When we start a beginner off, we usually have them say ta, because it certainly opens the throat. It has the throat correct. Ta, ta, ta. But I don't think that most brass players really tongue that way, that far back in the roof of the mouth. You will also notice to say ta, does not the tongue have to curl up a little bit to reach the roof of the mouth? Not really a comfortable position. Ta, ta, the tongue should fold out toward the teeth. And I believe that the tongue, in articulation of starting this note, that the tongue strikes the back part of the top teeth, right where they go into the gum line. Now just reach up there and feel that position. Just reach up there and feel where that tongue goes into the teeth. Now you notice I didn't ask you to say anything, because I haven't come across a word, a vocabulary word, that does put the tongue in that position. But it's just up behind the teeth, and ta, ta, it comes down and back off of this position. Now let me use a terminology here with you. So many of us in our teaching, we say to the students, I want you to tongue at this given point. I tell my students to tongue the back of the top teeth where it goes into the gum line. But in reality, as far as terminology goes, this is incorrect. I like to think of the rebound effect. We don't tongue there, we tongue away from there. That we don't tongue the teeth, we tongue away from the teeth. Some of you people can remember our grandmothers when they had to iron. They had the old wood stove. Had about 4 irons sat out on the wood stove. They would be using one of them, and then when that iron got cooled off, they'd reach over and they'd grab another one. Now, how did they test that iron to make sure that it was hot enough? They'd lick their finger, and they'd go at that iron with this wet finger. But when that finger was traveling to that iron, just before it got there, what happened? That hand started backing off. Never really made it to that hot iron. It was a rebound. She was touching away from the iron. It made it there, but it was a rebound type reaction. This is the way that we have to tongue, of tonguing away from the teeth. A feeling of coming off of the teeth.